session 5, and here we're going to focus on texturing, lighting and rendering, and then finally on the effects or effects tree that is compositing. So we're going to start with opening up one of our old scenes. So I'm opening up my alley scene. I have this is the one I want, and just open this up. Just a quick idea. I'm just going to change the reference model here. This has a reference model on, so we can go here and just quickly scene root and just go with the HighRes there. Just looks a little nicer. Okay, so right now, as you can see, if we go to textured view, there's no textures on here currently. I'm just going to hit G, turn off the grid, so we're just looking at this ground plane. Now let's go full screen. So we're going to add some basic materials to this object we've seen here, and then we're going to go and look at some of the texture settings as well, and UVing. Okay, so let's just start by going in, and normally I like to turn on my lights to headlights, and of course I like to turn on both headlights and headlights and specular. Now that's great for modeling. If actually going to, when you get to lighting, you have to turn the headlights off, and then you also want to create actual lights. And also there is a light in the scene. This will a headlight will overwrite it. So if you look at the scene, hitting the wrong hotkeys here. Okay. So if we actually look at the scene here, just close it down, you can see there is a light already in the scene. This light is a default light. Normally you want to delete that when you get to the final step. And you also notice when you render, it's going to render using that light, not using the headlight. So that's another thing to be aware of when you render. And you render out by hitting Q, drawing a box around things. Okay, so we'll leave that light in there for the moment, and we're just going to put some textures on the ground first of all to get started. So when you create material, again, you never want to go from the material here. You always want to go from modify material or use the view, rendering, material manager. This button also, and there's also a hotkey for the material manager, and you'll see that hotkey right here, Control 7. So here's the material manager. This is made up of several different views, and there's different options you can change if you don't want things to change, like stuff to hide when you click on it. So there is an option somewhere in the preferences. So what you have here is you have your textures, your materials, and a little render tree, and a bunch of other icons to create new materials, a create menu. We're going to go create a font here to create a new font material, and you can assign that material by dragging and dropping. I'll change the color first of all, so you can see I just set this down, make it blue for instance, and if I drag and drop this left mouse onto the ground, you can see it's assigned. Now one thing that's important about XSI is if you put a texture on that, it's going to use that blue color along with the texture. So often I want to set my colors not to be colors when I assign a texture on these. You can hold control and drag to get all together, to drag uniformly across here. I'll just set this to a value of 1 right now. Go here and stick an image on, and that will set the default placement image. Again, we don't see it yet because we haven't got a UV coordinates set up on the ground yet. So you want a new, and you want to pick the global coordinates for, or local coordinates for the UV. I'll do XC, and you can now see the texture on the ground. If I had a material color, you would see it tinted with a material color in the OpenGL view, but it would render correctly. It's just an OpenGL display. So there's our texture on the ground. Of course, we don't really want to have this default placement texture. It'd be much more fun to get something more interesting. So we can go new from file, and we can pick any texture we have loaded on the machine. So I can see what I have here. If I look on my course files and pictures, I have some pictures in here already I copied. I've also got some textures I created earlier. Here's some different textures, and then of course there's some default textures, but in the XSI samples under, got some under pictures, and you can see a bunch there. So, lots of different textures you could use. right here. And of course you can also go and get them from the net view as well. I'll just take this one of these basic ones here. Kind of, there's this roof one. It's kind of concrete like for the ground, and we just throw that there. You can see it's placed on the ground, and UVs, you know, stretched out because it's not a very high-res texture. You can tile these if you want to, and you can tile them in several ways. There's actually go back there on the actual UVs. Let me just go back. General. On the UVs, you can edit the UVs, and you can adjust things like the scaling here and turn wrapping on. That's one way. Or you can edit in the UV window that's called the texture editor. Under View, Texturing, Texture Editor. This is the normal way I do it. Pick the object, you can see the UVs here, and you can just select them by drawing a box around the UVs and scale them. Same hotkeys X, and scale them down or scale them up. Now as you scale them up, even though it looks correct here, and you can see some tiling, doesn't tile particularly well, this one. If I was to render this out holding Q down, you'll see the tiling is only one tile, and that's because you want to turn the UV wrapping on, wrapping U, wrapping V, and you can do that again in the edit UV settings as well. So that's how you can see now I've got my basic ground texture placed here. We can see how this looks in the render tree, and we can see right now we have our roof texture, the image node, we have our Phong going into the surface. So we have this set up. There's lots of things you can do with these image nodes. In the image node you can go here to clip properties, and then there's all these adjustments you can make. You can add, enable effects, and do a whole bunch of different adjustments here if you want to. And there's transformation, so you can scale. There's even some texturing options where you can set the resolution, MIP mapping, and many more. So in the material node you have both the material, then you have transparency, reflectivity, and indirect illumination that will affect your global illumination and caustics. There's even gloss and other options you can play around with here. Illumination deals with specular, and when you create materials there are the option of simple, and simple means without transparency and reflectivity. Okay, so we have our ground material set up now, and we're happy with that. But it would be nice if I actually had a few more layers to make it more interesting. We just have this one layer, so what you can do is actually layer these up. There's another window you can use to create that, or within the same window you can go to the layer window, and here, just like Photoshop, you can add a new layer, and I can add a new image layer, and you can see now I have an image layer. We can adjust the transparency. Again, it doesn't display in the OpenGL view correctly, but if I do a render region holding Q down, you can see the combination of the two effects, and you can adjust the transparency of that to increase or decrease. I'll change the image. You can just double click on the image, new from file, and I'll find an image like this kind of, if a cloud one here, or one of my gradients. So I can use, maybe I'll just use this one here because I can use it as like a dirt grunginess over the top. I don't like the UVs it's using, so I'm just going to change those, new, plane at XE, and now I have a different UV set for that one. We can bring the transparency down so it's very subtle, and you can see here what you got. If I want to, I could have actually placed the image here, this would be the mask, and just use a standard color there and use it as another way of creating dirt. So lots of options in here, and you can create lots of layers. If you go back to the render tree, you'll see now we've got the two layers, two base material and the first layer going in here. You can see all your clips you're using. So that's a quick basic overview of creating materials and texture and assigning textures inside of XSI. And you can also put textures on individual faces. So if we want to just put a texture on the front face of this object, you can just pick the face first of all, and we'll make a new material here. Let's quickly change the color so we can see what we have here. And the same idea, you can just drag and drop onto the selected face. That will make a cluster, a material cluster, that is now on that object. And you can see that cluster if you pick the object and open it up on the polygon mesh clusters. You'll see a polygon cluster here, and that cluster will tell what material here the font 1 is assigned to it. If I want to add more faces to this, I can either assign the material to more faces, but that's going to make more clusters. So you can see now I've got in here 2 clusters. So I'm going to delete this cluster here. If I want to add another face to a cluster, you can just pick the face and the cluster and the face, so I've got both cluster and the face, and just use this plus button here, and it adds another face to the cluster. Same idea as well, if you want to remove something from a cluster, you can pick the cluster and the face. That's it here, cluster. Again, pick the cluster and the face. Not getting it there. Try this once more. Seam root. Pick the cluster. Oh, that's what I'm doing. Okay. And the face, and then to do the minus. So make sure I get the cluster. I'm hitting the wrong hotkeys here. Cluster and the face, and then you do minus to remove something from that cluster. I have both faces selected, so let me just pick a single face, select the cluster, and then minus, and that will just move that one face from the cluster. Anyway, so that's, same with textures and UVs you can do here. Talking about UVs, we're going to go to a separate scene and actually go ahead and look at UV in a more complex object. My low res or cab body for my truck. Quickly have some other parts currently hidden. Pick these parts here. Hit on the layer. Okay. So okay. So there's just the low res, and you can see here the original with everything here with texture on. And I created texture by having this low res UV first of all. I've deleted the UVs from here, and I'm going to recreate them and show you how I can recreate them using some of the UV tools inside of XSI. So let's first of all look at what we have to start with. View, texture editor. Well, not much. We actually do have a material on here, but we can't see it because there's no UVs. So let's just go here to Material Manager and make sure we have a material on there. Yeah, that's good. And then what we'll do is now go in and create the UVs. We can do this inside the Material Manager, is one option. When we actually pick the objects and look at the image, we can see we can create UVs right here, new, and we could use maybe cubic UVs as a starting point. There's a few other options we'll talk about. So cubic UVs, we'll go in and do a cubic map. You can see here what you got. The only thing is I like to go and lay those out a little better so I haven't got all these overlapping areas, and this icon here shows me the overlaps. I'd normally use island select and start picking on vertices and moving stuff out. And normally I'll zoom out quite a bit, so I have plenty of room to go and start moving these sections out bit by bit. And by using island select, it won't take me too long to get all the bits. I'll try and work my way across, normally from an edge, and try and find similar sections that I can use later on to attach everything together. So window. And the reason I like to do this again is I can make a much better and cleaner layout than I'd have otherwise. Some bits are very small and there's not a tremendous amount to work with, but other areas, quite large areas, and you can definitely get a few more of these. There's the other window. We can put that down here for a moment. Yeah, I'm trying to keep some of the similar parts close together. Okay, so that's enough to at least start working with it. So really I'd like the cab to be, the hood to be one part. So what I'd need is, I'd need this front piece here, this piece here, and whatever piece is the middle. So we can look at these, pieces and see what we have. Now that piece is the windshield, this piece is the hood, so that's important for me, and we can see I'll move that over down to here because I'm going to work with that in a second. Next I want to pick these two sections here and put them either side of a hood. To pick those right now I've got island select, I'll turn it off, and I can pick vertices, or I can go polygon and pick polygons. Right now when I move those, they're attached. There's a mode here called tearing, and if you move them after you put tone on, you can tear things apart. So we can move this here, I can rotate it a bit, move it up, and what we're going to use is we're going to use some tools here to stick these back together. Same with this portion here, we'll just use the polygon select. I'll just hit U this time. I hit the wrong hotkey there. Hit V, move these down, rotate them, move them, and then we can try some of the tools here. We got an island select, so we've got this island heel to picked, or island heel picked. We'll try this one first, and you can see that moved it to the picked. We'll do the same with the other selection here. We'll just pick those ones, island select, click on those there, and then we can of course straighten this up later on if you need to with some of the other tools that are in there. There's several tools to straighten things up. You can go in, pick an area. I'll just do a island select here first of all to pick those. Just move those a bit. You can do relax, kind of relaxes things out if you need to. You can anchor the boundary, you can increase, decrease the amount, lots of options in there. You can also go in and just frame that. What normally I do is just go in and pick a series of points, turn the island off, just stick a series of points, and start using some of these tools here to kind of collapse them and straighten them into nice straight sections. And again, there's lots of these tools you can use, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time sure I have all the points selected. Turn the tearing mode off so I don't actually tear stuff. And anyway, you can keep going there and get things laid out. So lots of tools in here to do layout this way, and eventually you have everything where you want it, and then you'll just resize them all down and place them back into your 0 to 1 space if that's the area you're restricted to. So that's other UVing you can do, and again I took a little bit longer when I did the original UVing on this to make it look nicer. There's another couple of other techniques you can use. You can use you can create UVs with the property, projection, unique UVs. Unique UVs, I have to make sure I have the object selected first. So again, property, unique UVs. Uses a different technique. Now you can pick UV set here. Here's my UV set with unique UVs. You can see if I zoom into here how it laid all those out with no overlapping UVs. So it's kind of did what I just did without laying out. And you can use this angle grouping to kind of decide what works best for you. You can also turn smoothing on, normally used for characters, to do some smoothing around, again to get rid of some of the smaller points. But definitely, you know, it's a great tool for going in and getting your mapping in, very similar to the automatic mapping you may see in Maya. And what's nice is you saw it's dynamic, so as I adjust the slider we can see it change. So that's UVing inside of XSI. If you're working with a character, you can also use the automatic mapping for character. Normally you would go in and do some separation of the character first of all. I don't know if I got my... So the character here normally would go in and roughly tag areas and do some disconnect to create seams where you want to create UV seams. Otherwise it won't work quite as well. So you can pick edge loops. I can get one. Come on, edge loops. Okay, try that once more. Get the wrong edge loops there. So you can pick some edge loops and you can do that's the right mouse button, disconnect components, and that will make a seam. And you can create these seams when you actually do your automatic mapping to help UV areas where you want to UV them and help create UV borders, and then you could just merge those all back together afterward to get rid of them using some of the polygon tools. I'm not really going to go in and do character UV now because I really want to get into some other areas of texturing and lighting animation, so texturing and lighting rendering. A alley scene again, and I just want to go in here and quickly show you some lighting techniques. And I haven't got the fully textured scene here, but hopefully in the final videos we get a fully textured scene. But here we are. I'm going to throw some lights in here, so you can go here, primitive light, and you can do point lights, basic point light. You can see that there. We can move it around and kind of see how my scene looks with a point light, just using standard tools to move things around. If you want to, you can go and create spotlight. Spotlight is a group. You can see here it's got, if we look at the Explorer, you can see it's a root. It actually has the spot and the interest. You normally would move these around by moving the root or the whole light as a hierarchy. To move a light wherever you want it to be, to get the kind of base position, because to look through the light just by going to your camera, spotlight, spot, and then just look through the light as you would. It's nice to go in, of course, a shaded or textured mode when you're doing this. It's going to give you an idea of where you're looking. So let's say the light's somewhere over here, and we can go back to the camera again. Another difference with spotlights are you can hit the B hotkey and you can then adjust several things like the cone angle, the spread angle, and even control clicking will allow you to adjust. Sometimes it's a bit weird, but it allows just the light to fall off. I had to just change the angle a bit here. I think I made it way too long there, but the light start and end fall off using, I think I sent it into outer space. You can also, of course, if you have light selected, you'll see all these in the light setting, so that control would allow me just, well, that's what's going on there. Allows you to adjust this thing here, fall off a light. Anyway, turn the fall off for a second so it doesn't have any fall offset. Of course, you can hit B and you see your render, not B, you can hit the Q and draw a box to show your render region. And the render region has several options you can play around with. One of the cool options are these memo views. Here is your anti-aliasing, where you can increase your anti-aliasing to get a faster, or in this case slower render. So you can see my light is a bit too bright right now, so there's another light in the scene. I might as well get rid of my default light. And the other important thing about lighting is get rid of the ambient light. So there's a global ambience already set, so it tends to make things look bad. And this is right here on the ambient button. Just click on that ambience button. Best to do is hold control and drag these down to 0, and again you'll get true blacks where there is no light. I can say, okay, I like that as a preview. I can hit middle mouse on one of these memos and it will save that out. Now I say, well, really I want to change the color of that light, so I'll take that spotlight and we'll change the color to give it some warmth, so we'll give it some yellow color. You can also click right here and get a color box, a little bit of warmth there, and we'll pick the other light, point light, and we'll give this a cooler color, a little bit of blue, to give some contrast. Now you can see only half the scene has changed, and that is because we have this memo camera. You can actually scrub across and see before and after. If you like that, you can save another memo cam, saying yeah, that's good, and then make the scene now on this one. Let's add another light. So we'll just get a primitive light, get maybe another point light here. We'll just move this up a bit. So that's what you're doing when you're working in this kind of view. So I'll make this view smaller. Find that new light and move it up a bit. We're going to have this kind of high up on the building here. We'll change the color of this one to be a red light, very dark red light, and we'll give it only a small amount of intensity. Okay, so we've got this extra red light. Our memo cams actually got disappeared in this case. I was hoping they'd stay on minimized, but it looks like when you change the window, but actually didn't. So, but you can actually have several different memo cams. So I've got that light there, just memo cam that, and I'm going to delete the light now. I'm going to leave it a small view here, undo that. So I've got light here, memo cam, click here, delete the light, light's gone, memo cam again. So we've got now, with red light, or just a blue light, the red light's been deleted, so you can see if I want to get back to that light, we can just do revert scene, and you see the red light just came back here. And if we don't want that red light, we convert into this one, red light just disappears. So you can actually change your scene. This actually saves many scenes. You can clear these by right mouse and clear the comparison image. You can save these out right here just by save as. You can display different channels as well. There's also the options, and the options allow you to change different settings of how it renders. So you've got some mental array options, region options. There's different rendering, kind of render it does, anti-aliasing, where you can increase this up and down. Optimization, you can actually optimize for heavy scenes and set a memory limit so it can render massive scenes with millions and millions of polygons if you want. You can decide if you're going to render full render, light maps only, photon map only. There's all the motion blur, shadows, you can turn on different shadows here. Final gathering, you can turn that on. Now we have final gathering on in the scene. You can adjust the quality, number of rays to get high quality. You can see final gathering is very fast inside of XSI. Turn that off a moment. Global illumination, you can turn this on. If you turn global illumination on, you'll see no effect initially. Even if you go in and turn on the lights, because global illumination is turned on in several places to enable it in the lights as well, you'll still see no effect. And the reason for that is global illumination by default, rebuild maps not turned on. Once you turn this on, then you can actually see the effect of your global illumination. If this is not turned on in your render options or region options, you won't see any effect of global illumination. And now of course the global illumination is functioning correctly. A little bit of blue kind of spilling off from this object here. And again, you can change your render options to only render out the global illumination if you want. So again, as you saw when I was rendering, render type, photon map only, should only render the photon map. I don't think this will actually display it here, but there's definitely things you can change to see. There's passes in the actual render, so right now we can copy this to pass to global, so you can actually copy the settings across. You can also pass the region to global, and that will change the settings on your actual render settings. So you see here your actual render has separate settings, and you want to make sure those are ideally the same. There's both the pass options and the render options that you can see now I've copied across, so final gathering or global illumination is turned on here. In the pass settings or pass options, you can actually decide on your pass type. Lots of options, but one thing you can do here is actually create channels. There's passes down the bottom. You can create a new pass, like a shadow pass, and just render out a shadow pass. We haven't got shadows turned on, so it wouldn't be very interesting. But you could, a global illumination pass, for instance, or a cortex pass. So those can be created here. A channel is different. When you create a new pass and render your pass, you're going to render one render per pass. A channel, what that would do, if you add the channel, if you add a channel, the channels will be in the same render. So if we did, for instance, a specular, when you render this, render current path, it's only going to render out one render per frame, but what's going to create, if we look in the renders pictures, it actually created the specular and the main. In and I had normal turned on before. If I change the name of it, new path, and I probably should set it so frame range 1 to 1. Okay, render current path. It renders 1, but that made 2 images, and that's how that can work. Okay, let me just turn some shadows on of the lights, so it's a bit more interesting. So shadows are just right here, enable shadows. You normally want to turn your umbra down to 0, so you actually get the shadows being dark. You can use area shadows here. Turn area shadows on, and that will give you the kind of area light shadows, getting softer the further you get away when you set the scaling and rotation of the area. Shadow maps tend to be a lot slower, and if you turn these on, you also have to turn them on in the renderer. So when you turn them on here, you also need to turn them on in your render options as well. So you can see here, find it, shadows, and here you can shadow maps. Actually, they are enabled right now, but you can enable them or have them turned off when it only render ray trace shadows. I'm going to stick with ray trace shadows because they actually do render a lot faster in most cases inside of XSI. So we actually don't want shadow maps turned on. Okay, so that's some lighting basics. We can create a physical sky, and that's under a path. So if you actually edit your current path, a path can have a shader, and I can add an environment shader such as physical sky. I can inspect that shader, and I can adjust different settings in here. So we've got the sun direction, haze, horizon height. Just brought the horizon down a bit. The haze is set to grey right now, so maybe I'll have it more different colour for the haze. Maybe a more brownish, yellowish colour for the haze. So you can definitely adjust all of these settings. And this is just physical sky. Physical sky is kind of cool because it can be used as well as a light source if you're using final gathering. So if I turn physical sky on and I was turn off one of my lights, so now I just have that one light, and you can really see the global illumination there calculating. And I turn on final gathering, same idea, just in the region options. Just turn on or render options. Can just turn on final gathering. It's going to use the physical sky to calculate a little bit slower. I probably can adjust this slightly. The settings are a bit higher there. There it goes. So, throwing all that out right now. So that's using physical sky, but I put on a path to create this effect. Yeah. It's having some weird display issues right now with that. So that's again an overview of the lighting and some of the effects you can create with global illumination final gathering, and also physical sky inside of XSI. There are some other techniques you can use for creating geometry from your textures. One is displacement maps. So if you want to create a displacement map, I would just do a simple one on a polygon mesh. It's something I've used a lot of times in production. Just quickly, why manipulator showing there? There we go. Okay, so I've got a polygon mesh here. I'm going to stick a texture map on this. So I'm just going to go here, material, just create, it doesn't really matter what type it is. Let's go to shaders so we can see it's assigned, and we'll just do a render region, see the effect we got here. So to make a displacement map, we're just going to create a quick material node. So you get a node here, we can actually pick illumination, sorry, texture, image, and we can just link this image into displacement. Now it's not very interesting yet, so we're going to change the image to something more interesting. New from file, and I have a couple of images that are actually scan data. So there's this kind of rust displacement and a kind of few other ones here. I'll just take this one here, kind of flaky material, and this is from RGB, so XYZ RGB, and they have some sample ones on their website you can play around with. And you can see still I haven't got much detail. So if the geometry is selected, we'll go to the Explorer and we'll open up the geometry approximation settings, and we'll make a local copy, yes. And this is where you can adjust several things. We'll start by increasing the subdivisions, just like you would normally hit. You can do this by hitting plus a couple of times, and we should get a little bit more detail on that. And then next thing we'll go to displacement, and we'll start checking different options. I like to use fine displacement. I'll set the distance to 1. I do want to check if it's actually assigned. So let me just drag it on again, just to make sure map is actually assigned. And we'll start adjusting the fine detail down. Actually not seeing any change yet, and the reason I'm not seeing change is because I did a silly mistake. I forgot to assign UVs. Okay, there we go. So that's a little better. We always have to remember the UV. So you can see here we've got fine displacement. I set length normally around 0.1 or below. We can zoom in here and we can see the detail I'm getting from there. Now it's a bit much. If I start decreasing this down, there's a little issue here when you actually go below 0.5, it actually crops it. So I like to leave the number at 1. And if I want to adjust how much this goes down, I'm going to stick another node in here. And the node I'm going to put in, let me scale this window out a bit, is going to be a node image processing intensity. And you can just drag these nodes in between a couple of things. So you can just drag input there and output here, or input there, output, and then we can use the intensity nodes here to dial this down without getting the effect I had before when it starts clipping. You can see here you can go negative as well, but it's really nice. So it gives you like a displacement level slider. And if there's not enough detail, we can go back to the geometry approximation and we can set the length value on fine to be even lower. There's also a view dependent that will actually use a camera, and you'll get a much more definition using the camera and actual pixel size as well. So, but we can go quite low on this. We'll go 0.02 and you'll get similar level of detail, and you can get tremendous amount of detail from this rendering using all the way down to kind of sub-pixel displacements, very similar to how RenderMan works. That's all pretty nice, but it'd be really nice if I could actually create that geometry and use that geometry to actually create a normal map. Now if I want to make a normal map from this, there are some techniques you can use using render map. And render map can be used to actually render out and create a normal map from this object. You can just go here and make another grid. And render map, let's just close this down for a second. We'll set this grid to no subdivisions, and we'll put some UVs on it and an image on it. So we'll go here, make a new, let's create a new material, and we can assign it. You can assign to selection, very easy to assign it that way as well. And we just want to have some UVs on it, we don't need any. So we'll just quickly go here, property, texture map, or texture projection, sorry, XE. Let me just check actually if that did actually work, because it gave me a little warning message there. Yeah, that did work. Okay, so that's good. So this is all set up, and now what we can do is pick this object. We should rename this grid 1 so we know what it is. I call this capture. This is something I did quite a lot when I work in production, and we can take this and use a property render map. What render map does, it outputs whatever it sees in the render. So we'll just do render map. Render map. I'm just going to move the object down a touch as well. Okay, so it doesn't actually intersect, and we're going to actually, if I just do a straight render map, you wouldn't actually see any results, but render map can render out all the different textures, but even better, it can actually render out some advanced maps like normals. And then on top of that, we'll just set the resolution here. I want it pretty high res, 1024 at least. And on the maps, we got here, just pick the location for that. Let me just put it in my course files, in pictures, actually render pictures, so it'll be easier. Okay, and we're going to advance, and this is where we can take to search, and right now it's not search, it's just searching the actual surface. I'm going to say look away from the surface by about 0.2. So now it's actually moving the camera away from the surface and going to search other objects, so any other object it sees. And we of course have this displacement mapped object as well. You can ignore the render mapped object if you want, so only look at this object up here, and this is great if you want to do different transparency effects. And you can do bidirectional tracing when it looks both directions. That's fine, we'll just leave it as it is. We generate maps, and it will just render out that displacement, and it's going to make a normal map from that in this effect. So right now, if we look at that normal map, just go to the view, texturing, image clip viewer. It's an easy way to quickly load this in. Import, render pictures, and here it is. And there is a normal map created from that object. It's a really nice normal map you can see created, and I didn't actually have a HighRes object in there, just use that displacement. If you actually want to see the HighRes object, there is another shader you can use to create that. This is one you actually have to download, install as an add-on. I already have it installed. So I'm going to delete this capture map here, pick this one, and we'll just go to the material, and we'll add another node in here. Just going to say another illumination node. It's not an illumination node, but I'll just bring it in anyway. And these are as an add-in, user add-on, and it's my FX save render mesh, and you can find this on XSI base and several other places. It's a light map shader, and you can just bring this in and connect it to your light map. You just edit this here to give it a name. We'll call this rust metal, whatever, because that's what it's meant to be. And it's going to be an OBJ it writes out. Now I close this down, and when I render this out, what's going to happen is, when it renders, it's actually going to take the tessellation and write out a file. Okay, that's good enough. File, open. I may have had to render out the entire thing, but let's see what happens. Actually, sorry, not file open. File, import OBJ, and where did I put it? Let me just quickly check that once more. One thing you have to be careful is when you create these, you look where you put it. So it looks like I may have gone on my desktop, but I'm actually going to do this again. Okay, and now I know it's on my desktop, and we'll just quickly zoom out a bit. Yeah, whoops. Do a quick render. Make sure it creates that image, and when it renders out, okay, we close that down. We should see now on my desktop, notes, Rusty Metal OBJ. We can import that in. Import OBJ. It was on my desktop. I have a shortcut for that, Rusty Metal. And it's going to be a pretty dense mesh. But of course, to model something like that, or even sculpt it or paint it, could take a long time. So this is actually converting scan data to 3D geometry. XSI can handle pretty large. There's a few artifacts you saw with a map, that little line I saw there, but overall it's pretty good. And you can go in, of course, and smooth it out and tweak it, and you can see the resolution of this is pretty high. Now, something happens when you create these. You do sometimes get a couple little holes and areas, small problem areas you have to go in, kind of clean up a bit. So just be aware of some seam areas that can happen at times when it does render out. But overall, it can make a really good mesh, and those are actually not holes. It's just somewhere it tessellated and left some seams. So it's not actually a hole. It's just and this object here, if we want to look at it in the visibility options, stats, just to give an idea, it's probably a couple 100,000 polygons. Actually 500,000 polygons. So that's 500,000 polygons created in one way, fairly quickly and easily. Okay. Is Ultimapper, and I actually have seen that already has been set up, but I'll just open it up and let's quickly grab that scene. Oh yeah, okay, it's right up top there. So this has already been Ultimapper, but I'm going to redo it so you can see. So the front of the truck is actually, being done using Ultimapper instead of taking the HighRes one I had previously. So what I'm going to do here quickly is go in, unhide that, and we'll take my box low-res truck here, and we'll just remove the Ultimapper from it, and we'll remove the shader from it as well. So we're back to how it was. Okay, and we'll move, let's get rid of a few other things in here just to freeze that down. And we'll get rid of tangents. Okay, so what this has right now, it has some UVs on it, and that's important. And the UVs are non-overlapping. That's also very important. So I've got my UV set up this way. You can see they're nice, laid out pretty well, and there's no overlapping UVs here. I could have rearranged them a little better than this, but this is good enough for the moment. Ideally you want to not have some seams in certain areas, but again here would be fine. The next step is going to be to actually create the HighRes, and if I was to hide this just for a second, you can see I'll just turn off the texture from there. You can see this one here is got a lot of detail in there, and this one of course hasn't. So the idea is I need to auto-map this together. The first step is I'll make a layer here so it's easier to do. Layer from selection. Okay, the first step is we need to take all these parts I want to use for the auto-map process and put them into a group. So what you do here is you pick all the parts you want to use for the auto-mapping process, and then you'll go in and edit group, and you'd create a group, edit create group. You can see here I have a group there created of all those parts. Once you have the group, you select the group when you go in to select the object as your source object for the auto-map. We'll just unhide my box truck here. Hide. Okay. View, display, unhide selection. Oh, it's on a layer, sorry. It's when unhide things when they're on a layer. So we'll take this box truck first of all and do a property auto-mapper. And the auto-mapper first of all creates a tangent map to figure out where the tangents are on the object. You can edit this a bit if you need to. We can set the resolution. We'll do 1024. With quality maybe medium, and distance to surface I'm going to hit the compute button, and this will quickly, I haven't picked the HighRes yet. We pick the HighRes, go pick, I'm going to pick the group, the cab group, and then hit the compute button. So you have a HighRes group, or you can pick individual objects, but if you want to pick more than one object they have to be together in a single group. You can't say I want to have like pick 5 objects. And it tells me the offset roughly where it is. I want to create a normal map in tangent space. On advanced there's some other options you can play around with. You can pick your texture projection, it's fine what I have here. And you can also see adjust tangents, where you can go in and adjust the tangent smoothing here to see how things are. I'm going to leave it again as it is. When you're ready, hit generate, and I'll put this again, put it in my document somewhere, and it's going to call it box truck. Normally puts it into your current project, with my XSI training project. Once it's finished calculating, it doesn't take particularly long unless you turn the settings really high. Yes, in my XSI training directory. We can actually preview it by using what's called the preview shader. You can pick your graphics card. I have a Quadro effect in here in my machine. I can hide my low res target. Hide my high res source, that's what I want. You can see right now, and create a preset. Now if I go to the render tree, you can see right now that there's not much in there shader wise. When we say create preset preview shader, it makes a new shader using my normals and everything else. You can see roughly how it is. I'll just deselect that for a second. You can see it's created a normal map shader. It's not perfect, but you know, it's a lot better than the previous box shader we had before. What's also nice about the shader is there's some little tangent issues there on the window, but we can again tweak that later on, and a few issues again around the fender when it's trying to get a bit more detail than it can. You can look at different graphics cards, DirectX. That hasn't been working great for me with this graphics driver, but there's also Mental Ray, And mental ray is really cool because mental ray, oh, let me just quickly preview the shader here, and you can see before I went to mental ray, this is a real-time shader, and you've even got the program nodes here where you've actually got code you can adjust. You can also show, of course, here your thumbnails, and you can see the different shaders it's using right now. It's just using again the normal map shader right there. And of course you can double click on that and preview it and see how that normal map shader looks, and where there's areas that probably need some work. And, you know, some of the UVs aren't great. So let me try a mental ray shader. So the same idea, we can go to the Automapper node. I just hit F3 that time to open up a floating explorer, and we'll do create preview again. We can refresh this. Now we can see it's got, you know, some mixed shaders, mixed colors. It's got an XSI normal map shader here that's taking, and this allows us to actually render out a normal map. Yeah, if I had some better lighting in there, let me quickly do that. Primitive light. Just put a point light in there. Move that light around a bit. Close that down for a second. So we just move the light a bit, so it's okay, and we just render out that again. It should look pretty nice. You can see as I move the light around, you're getting a lot of detail from the XSI normal map shader. So again, it's really cool that you can use these shaders and preview both real time and, you know, the XSI shader if you want. You can actually have multiple shaders at once. So here's a preview material. There's a real-time node. You can actually have a real-time shader and a mental ray shader hooked in at the same time. Right now, when you create these shaders, it actually doesn't keep both of them, but it's definitely something you can do. So that's it for the Automapper and Render Map. Last thing I was going to talk about was compositing. So you can actually go in and use what's called the effects tree to do a lot of really cool compositing effects. So say for instance you want to tint your entire scene, or you want to change something, you got what's called the effects tree where you can use for that. So let me open up one of my basic scenes, and here's a little alley scene with a little bit of lighting in. This again is not particularly interesting, but it's just something we can. And I'll just put the actual text I use for modeling just thrown on there, so you can actually see here what I have. And there's a physical sky and some other bits and pieces inside here. Let me just get a slightly better angle so we're not looking at, it doesn't look quite as ugly. And we're up the anti-aliasing a bit. So I've decided this building is cool, but I really want my scene to be kind of black and white. So I can go into and use, I'm going to stop the render for a second and use the effects tree and look at some of the effects you can use. So this is another layout. So you've got layouts and there's an effects tree layout. And you can open up the separate effects tree views here under compositing if you want, but you have to be careful with that. So I'll just go compositing here, and we can see I've got a couple of things already set up in here before. So we've got a texture, and I did a little ripple on it, and I put it back into the texture again. You can actually see you can link these textures through themselves and change your textures. So let's just do that. I'll show you how to delete these two and bring in one of my clips. So we've got here, you know, building, I think this is the one I'm using. Okay, and then we can go in here and just do, there's different ops. So color adjust, grayscale for instance, and we can just go in here, pull it out, put it in, and now the text is grayscale. When we go back to our regular view, you can see that's now a grayscale building. Now I want maybe more of a slightly different look here, so I switch back to my compositing view, and I say, well, maybe I'll add a painterly effect charcoal to it. So we can actually do, instead of just grey, we can do this grey kind of charcoal effect, and you can go in here, of course, and play around with a lot of these effects. So there's the charcoal effect, you've got the details, so maybe that's a bit too much. Get a bit more detail there. You can use this for like non-realistic rendering effects. Now if that's too much, we can actually take that charcoal with this grayscale one, and we could do an op, and just one of the composites, maybe just an over or math composite. Do an over here, and you can bring these two in. And see the effect here by kind of doing a combined effect, and then linking that back into the shader. Now if we look at the scene, and you can see here, just zoom in a bit, you can see that effect I got on the building. If I want to change the entire scene to this effect, instead of actually affecting just that one object, we could go and affect the entire pass, and you can even composite actual passes together as well. So that was a single texture, but you got the clips, you always got passes, so I can actually get the default pass. And there's our default pass, that's the entire scene render, and we could do the same effect. We could take that pass and use that and feed it through a couple of these, and then have it come out. So we'll just unhook that. If you want to unhook one, you can just, sorry, wrong hotkey there. You can just go in here and right mouse button to unhook this, and we'll just go back to the standard texture because we don't really need to worry about this one anymore. And that's, you know, the entire pass. You can actually see that's rendering out the entire scene there from the current camera view using this effect, and we can actually adjust the over to actually see what we have here. And of course we can take it over and put that as an op file out image, file output, and that will actually render it out as a final image when you process it through. So this is taking an entire pass. So a ton of things you do with the compositor. You can take your multiple passes, composite them together, keying, everything else. So lots and lots of function in here, and very useful tool. And with the textures, you can use it for texture processing, texture tinting, or texture effects. So have fun with that. Definitely something to have fun with and play around with. I'll go back to my default view, and now everything's back to normal here. If I render it out, you can see it's just a standard render because I put everything back. It's just in the composite now after the final render. I think that's everything I had in my list of goodies to cover. So hope you have fun and continue to work and enjoy using XSI.